let's go ahead and pivot over to town meeting because I wanted to ask a bunch of questions about town meeting. I'm sure our listeners will have questions about town meeting as well. We've talked about it a little bit already, but let's do a deeper dive into town meeting. What is town meeting? Why should folks care about town meeting? Why do we need it? These sorts of questions. Let's start there.
Sure. Yeah. So town meeting, I mean, as I mentioned, is the legislative branch of our government. It's the elected, group of people that decides the legislative questions for Natick. So things like the budget is a major thing that they deal with. They also, besides appropriating money, they also deal with, with ordinances, right? Which means just like local laws, right? So they pass, things like, like last year, they passed a ordinance that, allows us to, makes it easier to lower the speed limit, for example, in certain areas of town. And they also pass zoning ordinances. A lot of the discussion has to do with zoning, and that's something that's through town meeting. And again, like I said about the select board, I think that as far as like the impact on your day-to-day life, like it's town meeting has a much bigger impact than maybe than the state legislature or even Congress does. Because it's here, right? It's so local, and so it's going to impact the way that our neighborhoods are, the affordability of living here, all that stuff comes into play from town meeting. So I think it's really important, and as long as we have a town meeting form of government, people should be paying attention to it. And I always encourage people to run for town meeting because we need more voices in town meeting.
Is it easy to run for town meeting? Can you talk about that process?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it's relatively easy. You need to run for town meeting. You need to get 10 signatures on a form that you get. So you go to the clerk's office and you get a form to fill out that allows you to run for town meeting. You have to get 10 signatures from registered voters, which can include your own signature. So I guess just 9 other people need to sign for you to get on the ballot. And then once you're on the ballot, I mean, sometimes those elections aren't even contested. Most of the time, it seems like those elections are not even contested. And in fact, this year, there's especially likely to be a lot of slots because the town was re-precincted, which means that the precincts were adjusted slightly in response to census data, which means that every single town meeting member is up for re-election. Every town meeting seat is up for re-election this year. And right now you can get papers to run for town meeting. So strongly encourage people to do that because I think that it's a good way to get involved, and it's something that we need more good people in.
Yeah, it's my understanding that on any given town meeting of I think it's 180 members, there are a good number of people who just aren't there, and there's vacancies in certain precincts, aren't there too?
Many who aren't there. There's also seats that are vacant, right? So there's people who are elected but don't show up to town meeting, and there's also seats that just are not filled because no one runs, and so a lot of opportunity there to make an impact.
Sure, makes sense. One question that I know that I had as I was learning more about town meeting in my own journey onto town meeting, which I still question why they even allowed that, but there are a lot of procedural things that didn't immediately make sense to me at first. Like there's this idea of a warrant, and there's articles, and there's motions. Can you try to simplify a lot of this for our listeners who might be curious about how town meeting works?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, at a very high level, like, the warrant is basically the agenda for town meeting. So the warrant sets the things that town meeting is able to debate and act on. So town meeting is not, and I think this is actually really important because it sort of helps people to understand why the select board is so important and why town meeting, while also important, doesn't have as much power as you might think it does, because town meeting is not a legislative body in the same way that Congress or the state legislature is, where the individual legislators propose bills that then get debated on and passed or not passed. Instead, town meeting can only act on things that are in the warrant, which is the agenda for town meeting. And things get on the warrant in one of two ways. They either get on the warrant because of a citizen petition, which means that a citizen writes a warrant article, meaning writes a topic that they want town meeting to act on, and then gets 10 signatures for it. And then it gets to town meeting that way. Or something can get to town meeting by the vote of a government body, such as the select board, the school committee, the planning board, the zoning board, things like that. And so that's yet another way that, the select board has really, and in that case, it's a formalized agenda setting function that they can get articles in front of town meeting relatively easily. So once you have this warrant, so the warrant is like going to be a list of all the different topics that town meeting is going to act on. Then during town meeting, they go through the warrant and act on each one, kind of one by one. And in acting on the way that town meeting acts on a warrant article is through motions. So a motion will be made to, there might be an article, for example, that says something like, to rezone some area from residential to commercial or something like that, right? And, it'd be a little more complicated than that because there's different residential and commercial types of zoning. But let's just say, right, you're rezoning it from some kind of residential use to some kind of commercial use. It would say that on the warrant, but then the actual text that would go into the bylaw that would change our zoning ordinance is what would be in the motion. So a town meeting member will make a motion at town meeting, on town meeting floor, saying, I move that we enact, we amend bylaw such and such to say X, Y, Z, and it'll say the exact text of what they want to go in there. And then, assuming that motion gets seconded, then town meeting debates on it and they either pass it or they don't.
Okay. So at its core, we get items on the agenda for discussion. They get brought up in a very specific way that allows for action to be taken on them. We talk about it and then we vote.
Yeah, that's pretty much right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's honestly, it's pretty straightforward. And I join you in encouraging folks to run for town meeting if you have the privilege and capability to do so. So I think that's great. One last question on town meeting that I wanted to make sure was clear. If you are not a town meeting member, how can you participate in town meeting?
Well, that depends on the format of town meeting that it takes. So in the last 4 town meetings, it has been a remote format. So you can participate via Zoom. You have to, well, I guess there's 2 ways. It depends on what you mean by participate. But because again, when we've been doing it remotely, there's sort of 2 ways to participate. One is if you just mean watch, if that's what you mean by participate, then you can watch it through Pegasus, through the video on demand system for the town, which you can find on the website. And if you just Google Natick Town Meeting, then it'll show you all that information. If you want to actually participate in terms of speak at town meeting, which every citizen has the right to speak at town meeting, every resident has the right to speak at town meeting. Then you have to email the moderator in order to get permission to speak. So you'd email the moderator, which again you can find his information on the website, and you ask for permission to speak, and you say, I want to speak about this article. And then you would sign on to the Zoom, and you'd speak. So now, all that being said, though, I think all that is going to probably change when we go either back to an in-person format or to a hybrid format, which I think is maybe what we'll end up doing. I mean, town meeting recently passed a home rule petition in the state legislature to authorize us to use a to use a hybrid form of town meeting, where, in other words, people would be mostly in person, but you'd be able to also participate remotely. And so I think that the instructions for that could very much change depending on what that looks like if we have that in the spring. If we don't have that and we go, completely in person, maybe that's what it'll be. I don't know what it will look like exactly. That's also, by the way, another thing that the select board would have a lot of say in deciding. But if we go completely in person, then it's the instructions for participating are a little bit easier. You just show up. You just show up and ask to raise your hand to be recognized when you want to speak. And town meeting, a speaker from the public has the same right as a town meeting member to participate in debate. The only thing they can't do is make motions and vote.
Okay. That seems like a straightforward process, especially if we're in person. Still seems straightforward if we're hybrid or remote, but it's good to hear that there is a mechanism for folks who are taking an interest in our town government, might not be town meeting members, but are still able to express their concerns nonetheless. So that's super great.